The office building buzzed with life that Monday morning, its glass walls reflecting the glow of success. No one paid attention to the man in the faded blue uniform sweeping the marble floor. Except the janitor saw everything. While executives hurried to meetings and assistants balanced coffee trays, he noticed the little things, a flicker in the lights, a smell that didn't belong, a stranger's nervous glance. No one listened when he spoke before. This time, he didn't ask. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the CEO's life hung in the balance, and the janitor was their only hope. Mason Carter had been working as a janitor at Raven Technologies for 3 years. Every day, he arrived before dawn, cleaned the sprawling offices, and left after the last meeting ended. People barely remembered his name, but he remembered everything. He noticed which executives stayed late, which interns whispered in the hallways, and which elevators made odd noises when they shouldn't. Today felt different. The moment he walked in, a sense of unease gripped him. It wasn't obvious, at least not to anyone else. The main lobby smelled faintly of chemicals, sharp and acrid, masked under a layer of lemon-scented polish. Mason frowned. The company hired outside cleaners for specialty work, so what was that smell doing here? He bent down near the reception desk, pretending to tie his shoe, and saw a tiny droplet of clear liquid on the floor. Strange. As he continued his rounds, Mason's mind churned. His instincts were honed by years of cleaning up after people who didn't think twice about him. He noticed what others ignored. And this morning, the air in the CEO's wing felt charged, almost tense. The glass doors leading to the executive suite were spotless. Too spotless. Normally, there'd be at least a smudge or fingerprint or two, but today they gleamed like someone had scrubbed them obsessively. He pushed his mop bucket into the suite slowly. The CEO, Victoria Hale, wasn't in yet, but her assistant was bustling about, arranging papers and prepping coffee. Mason greeted her with a nod, but she barely looked up. Executives rarely did. As he polished the floors, Mason noticed a ventilation panel above Victoria's office door slightly ajar. Odd. Those panels were never touched unless maintenance was called, and Mason knew for a fact no maintenance request had been filed. He made a mental note and kept working, but his stomach tightened. Something was wrong. That was when he saw the man. Tall, wearing an expensive suit with a visitor's badge clipped to his jacket. Mason had never seen him before. Visitors weren't unusual, but this guy didn't have the easy confidence of a client or the distracted air of a vendor. He looked tense. His eyes darted toward Victoria's office, then to the vents, then back to his phone. Mason gripped his mop handle. He wasn't a security guard. He was a janitor, a single dad just trying to make it through another day. But something deep inside told him to pay attention. He watched as the man walked down the hall and disappeared around the corner. Mason quickly finished mopping, parked his cart, and stepped closer to the office. The smell was stronger here. He sniffed the air and felt a chill race down his spine. It wasn't cleaning fluid. It smelled like something from his past life, a life no one here knew about. Before he was a janitor, Mason had served in the Navy, working around chemicals and machinery that could kill a man in seconds. And the smell coming from that vent wasn't harmless. Mason slipped into a supply closet, pulled out a step ladder, and climbed toward the vent outside Victoria's office. His heart thudded in his chest as he pried it open, just enough to peek inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. A small metal canister taped inside, a faint mist hissing from its nozzle. Gas. His pulse spiked. Someone had rigged a chemical dispersal device into the ventilation system. It was already active, releasing something into the air. He didn't know what chemical it was, but judging by the acrid tang and his past experience, it wasn't for cleaning. Victoria Hale was set to arrive in less than 10 minutes. If she walked into this office, she wouldn't last long. Mason yanked out his phone to call security, but froze. If he made noise, whoever planted it would know he'd discovered it. And if they were still inside the building, they might panic and trigger something worse. He had to think. He climbed down, replaced the vent carefully, and pushed his cart toward the hallway, his face calm but his mind racing. He scanned the area for the man he'd seen earlier. Gone? Damn it. Mason ducked into a quiet corridor and dialed 911, keeping his voice low. He reported an emergency without going into details, afraid the call might be overheard. Then he called the building's security desk. No answer. Unbelievable. He didn't have time to wait. He grabbed a roll of duct tape from his cart, sprinted back to the vent, and sealed it shut. It wouldn't stop the leak completely, but it would slow it down. His next move was clear: get everyone out, especially Victoria. But as he turned the corner, he almost collided with her. Victoria Hale, the CEO of Raven Technologies, strode toward her office, heels clicking against marble. Her assistant trailed behind, juggling a tablet and a coffee tray. "Morning," she said politely, barely glancing at him. "Ma'am, you can't go in there," Mason blurted, stepping in front of her. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me." "It's not safe," Mason said firmly. "There's a maintenance issue." Her assistant frowned. "What issue?" Mason didn't have time for diplomacy. "Please," he said, lowering his voice. "Trust me. You need to leave this area, now." Victoria studied him for a long second, suspicion flickering in her eyes. No one ever stopped her. But something in Mason's tone, the urgency, the raw honesty, made her hesitate. "All right," she said finally. "But you'd better explain." Mason exhaled, but before he could respond, a voice behind him said coldly, "He doesn't need to explain." Mason turned. The man from earlier stood there, hand inside his jacket. And Mason knew instantly. This wasn't over. Mason's body tensed as the man slowly withdrew his hand from his jacket. For a moment, Mason feared he was about to see a gun. But instead, the man revealed a sleek black remote with a single red button. "Step away," the man said, voice calm but deadly. "This doesn't concern you." Mason's eyes flicked to the remote. One press, and the entire ventilation system could blast the toxic gas through the executive floor. He knew what that meant. Victoria, her assistant, and anyone else nearby would be dead within minutes. "I'm afraid it does," Mason said evenly. He angled his body slightly, shielding Victoria behind him. "You don't want to do this." The man smirked. "You think you understand what's happening here. You have no idea. Try me." Mason's voice was steady, though his heart pounded like a war drum. The man laughed bitterly. "Your CEO destroyed lives. She stole patents from the people who built this company from nothing. My brother was one of them. He killed himself because of her greed. And now she loses everything." The man's thumb hovered over the button. Mason's instincts screamed for action, but one wrong move and everyone in this hallway would die choking. "Listen," Mason said, voice low and calm. "I'm sorry about your brother. I really am. But this isn't justice. This is murder." The man's jaw tightened. "Call it what you want. She deserves it." Mason shifted slightly, his hand brushing the mop handle resting against his cart. His Navy training came flooding back. Control the weapon, disable the threat, protect the target. Timing would be everything. "Victoria," Mason said quietly without looking at her. "Walk away." "Now?" "I'm not leaving," she whispered, her voice taut with fear and pride. Mason's eyes stayed locked on the man. "If you want to end a life today," he said softly, "make it mine. Because you're not touching her." For a split second, the man hesitated, long enough for Mason to act. In one swift motion, Mason grabbed the mop handle and swung it like a bat. It cracked against the man's wrist, sending the remote clattering across the polished floor. "Run," Mason shouted. Victoria and her assistant bolted down the corridor as Mason lunged for the remote. The man roared in anger, tackling Mason before he could reach it. They crashed to the floor, grappling, fists flying. The man fought with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose, but Mason had faced worse. They struggled for control, rolling dangerously close to the remote. Mason slammed an elbow into the man's ribs, then headbutted him hard enough to daze him. Snatching the remote, Mason scrambled to his feet, just as the man pulled a knife from his belt. Too late. The man snarled, charging. Mason dove aside, the blade slicing the sleeve of his uniform. He swung the mop handle again, striking the man's knee. The attacker stumbled, and Mason drove his shoulder into him, slamming him against the wall. The knife clattered to the ground. Breathing hard, Mason pinned him with sheer strength, pressing the mop handle against his throat. "It's over," Mason growled, but the man's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "You don't get it," he rasped. "That wasn't the only device." Mason froze. Those words hit Mason like a punch. "Not the only device. His eyes darted toward the vents running along the corridor ceiling. If there was another canister hidden somewhere else, sealing one vent wasn't enough. "Where?" Mason demanded, tightening his grip. "Where's the other one?" The man laughed bitterly, blood trickling from his lip. "You'll never find it in time." Mason slammed him harder against the wall. "Try me!" Before the man could answer, building security finally arrived, guns drawn. "Hands up!" one of them barked. Mason stepped back, letting the officers cuff the would-be killer, though his mind was racing. Time was bleeding away, and people's lives were still at stake. "Search the vents!" Mason snapped at the guards. "There's another device!" The head guard frowned. "Who the hell are you?" "The guy who just saved your CEO," Mason shot back. "Move!" Victoria appeared again, flanked by 2 guards. Her face was pale, but her voice was firm. "Do what he says." Within minutes, the executive floor erupted into controlled chaos. Security teams swept the offices, and employees were evacuated down the stairwell. Mason didn't wait. He ran straight to the maintenance control room. Years of janitorial work had taught him this building's skeleton better than anyone else. He burst inside, fingers flying over the ventilation schematics on the touchscreen. His gut clenched when he saw it. Anomalous airflow readings near the boardroom, 2 floors down. Another canister. If it discharged during a meeting, the casualty count would skyrocket. Mason sprinted down 2 flights, lungs burning, heart hammering. He reached the boardroom hallway just as a faint hiss reached his ears. Dropping to his knees, he yanked open the nearest vent. And there it was, a second canister, mist already curling like ghostly fingers. With no time for tools, Mason ripped off his uniform jacket, wrapped it around his hand, and grabbed the canister. The metal burned cold against his skin, fumes clawing at his throat. Holding his breath, he hurled it into an empty conference room and slammed the door. The boom came a second later. A muffled pop, glass rattling. Mason staggered back, coughing, eyes watering, but the door held. When security found him minutes later, slumped against the wall, sweat and dust streaking his face, he managed a shaky grin. "Boardroom's clear," he rasped. Hours later, after the building was declared safe and the last emergency crew left, Mason stood alone in the lobby. He felt drained but alive. More importantly, so was Victoria. She approached him quietly, her usual steely composure softened. "You saved my life," she said simply. Mason shrugged. "Just did my job." "That wasn't your job," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And that uniform doesn't do you justice. I want you on my personal security team, starting tomorrow." Mason chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm a janitor." "Not anymore," Victoria replied. "You're the man who saw what no one else did. And that's exactly who I need." As she walked away, Mason glanced down at his calloused hands, still trembling from the adrenaline. For years he'd kept his head down, cleaning up after other people's messes. But today, he'd cleaned up something far bigger. A mess that could have ended lives. And for the first time in a long time, Mason felt like he was more than invisible. He was the man who saved the day.